Hey, it's Drea again here with an update from my third year as an evening law student at Georgetown. Oh, I think I have a scab in my nose. Oh, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna move on. So, today's video is a continuation of a series that I've done about on-campus interviews, and this video is the third and last of that series. I'm going to continue talking about a question that I get often, and that is about big law or large, high-paying law firm job prospects as a part-time evening student. This summer, I'll be doing a career pivot and leaving my full-time job to work as a summer associate at a law firm. This video is going to list 5 tips and tricks that I found to be helpful to me during the OCI process as an evening student. So let's get started. Now that we've learned what OCI is, or I've at least talked about it in one of my previous videos, this list is going to be catered to people who are trying to juggle working full-time with going through this pretty strenuous process. Tip number 1 is to do your research at least a week before OCI begins. For example, OCI at Georgetown began in the last week of July. So what I started doing was researching law firms, doing prep. Of course, you can begin the process before then and prep for weeks or months ahead of time, but at the end of the day, I didn't find all that prep to be necessary. As long as you give yourself about a week, it can help you commit a lot of information to memory that will be helpful for you to reference during your interviews and during the application process. It's important to learn things like what certain law firms are famous for, what their typical clientele are, and their primary practice areas in the geographic area where you're interested in applying. As I was doing my research, I made a note to make sure that I find at least one specific thing that I liked about each specific law firm that I was applying to. Similar to a YX letter when you're applying to law schools, you want to have a why this law firm reason when you're undergoing your OCI interviews. It probably sounds silly, but another thing that I did was practice my why this law firm, either in a video that I watched and critiqued myself on, or say it to myself in the mirror. The last thing I wanted to do was be unprepared for those kinds of questions, and having a little practice under my belt made sure that I wasn't caught off guard. The second tip I have is to basically treat OCI like a secondary law school application process. In the weeks before the process begins, I think it is extremely helpful to go through your resume, make sure you don't have any typos, issues, discrepancies, perfect your writing sample, have your unofficial transcript on hand, and if needed, but make sure you check if it's needed first, a cover letter and references on hand and ready to go. That may include things like warning your references ahead of time that, hey, I'm gonna list you as a reference on this application, and alerting them that they may be receiving a call on your behalf. As you're proofreading, make sure to double check things like making sure that you have the name of the firm that you're applying to correct for the firm that you're sending your information to. I say this because as a law student who applied to, I think, around 60 different firms, it's really easy to mix things up. Those are those small negligible mistakes that can be prevented by doing some extra proofreading or having a friend or colleague look over your materials before you send them out officially. Tip number 3 that helped me was also taking time off of work for my callback interviews. I mentioned this in my earlier video where I talked about the basics of OCI, but there are 2 different types of interviews when you're in the OCI process. The first is screener interviews, which consist of about a 20-minute chat or talk with a representative at a law firm. And the second type of interviews are callbacks. Now, callbacks can be 20 to 30 minutes. However, you'll typically have them with anywhere from 3 to 6 plus different people. In translation for me, that meant that I was spending multiple 2 to 3 hour chunks talking and interviewing with law firms during 1 week. Because of the number of callbacks that I completed, I believe there was at least one day where I doubled up and had to complete 2 callbacks on one day. Because they're so long, you'll spend a lot of time repeating your elevator pitch, but they're lengthy and draining. I took time off of work to complete these interviews, and I think that if I hadn't, I would have been basically up a creek without a paddle. I say that because very few full-time jobs would even allow someone to take 2 or 3 hours away from their desk to interview somewhere else. I didn't need to worry about my full-time job or my commitments while I was trying to keep my head clear. It also helped me feel significantly less stress about the process, and it gave me some time to reflect on the potential qualities that I was looking for in an employer. Tip number 4 is to take notes during your interviews. In my notes, I included things like the names of the people I was interviewing with, specific issues that we discussed during my interview, sometimes the particular practice areas that they worked on, especially if I was interested interested in those practice areas, and anything else that seems relevant. I used a lot of the information from my notes to send thank you follow-up emails to the people who completed my interviews. It also helped for me to look at the biographies of the people I was interviewing with and to have some specific questions prepared about them, their time, their work, and general things that they were interested in. While I can't say whether I know thank you emails make or break an applicant, I have heard that they are something that can count against an applicant if they don't send them. I also think it's a part of general etiquette for interviewing, especially during the OCI process. My final tip and piece of advice for part-time or evening students going through the OCI process is to try to physically visit the offices where you've received offers. Now, I know this might not be possible for everyone applying to big law firms because oftentimes people apply in cities where they don't physically live. To the extent that it's possible, and if you're applying to a place that is within driving distance of where you are currently, visiting in person is something that I found to be extremely helpful. While it's certainly true that work environments are becoming increasingly virtual, there are certain nuances about a given atmosphere that you won't be able to pick up on unless you visit in person. Because I applied only to Washington, D.C. firms, I made a note to visit every firm where I'd received an offer. From that, I was able to get a gauge of people's attitudes, demeanors, and while you can't necessarily judge a firm completely by its cover, in a world and city where a lot of law firms offer very similar packages, benefits, and pay, seeing the physical workspace can help provide some type of differentiation from one place to another. Not to mention, if you do visit, some law firms will offer you the opportunity to grab a drink or food with some of their associates. And that's something I found to be a really fun networking opportunity. All right, that's all I've got for today. Throw me some comments down below. Are you applying for OCI? Are you excited? Are you nervous? Feel free to also drop some tips and tricks or resources that you found to be helpful. Feel free to reach out to me on my email account, which I've included in the description box down below, or through Instagram. That's all I got for today, and I'll see y'all in a couple of weeks.